Let's talk some chess. Today we'll go over one of the greatest mistakes in chess history. This took place in the 1972 World Chess Championship, Bobby Fischer versus Boris Spassky. Very, very famous chess match. I'm sure you've seen the movies and the books and the coverage about it. This was game one, so setting the tone for the rest of the match. The move that we want to talk about is actually at the end of the game, so we'll go through the game, we'll talk about the move, the story behind the move, and sort of how that set the tone and affected the rest of the match. We have d4 opening us up from Spassky, knight to f6 by Bobby, c4, and e6, preparing to develop this dark-squared bishop. We have knight to f4, knight to f3, adding protector to this d4 pawn, and d5 here, challenging this pawn on c4, which is undefended. Spassky ignores this pawn, and the fact that it's undefended for now, just develops a piece, brings the knight to b3, and it looks like a free pawn, but after you take the pawn, then you get e4, which opens up a very solid center and a discovered attack from the bishop on c4. It looks a little bit Queen's Gambit-y, but if Black was playing the Queen's Gambit. So Bobby doesn't go into this. It doesn't really work. Instead, he puts the bishop on b4, pinning the knight to the king. Very solid, principled move. And now just e3 by Spassky, opening a path to develop for his light-squared bishop, and now adding a defender to this c4 pawn. Bobby castles kingside, bishop to d3, preparing to castle kingside for Spassky. Here we have c5, adding some tension to the center and cementing this bishop on b4, and now kingside castle by Spassky. Knight to c6. a3, forcing this bishop to make a decision. Do you capture? Do you retreat? Here, Bobby decides to retreat, and now knight to e2. Spassky, I guess, doesn't want to allow this trade, messing up his pawn structure, maybe, or he just wants to reroute his knight to the king side, where it can be more helpful in an attack moving forward. We have d takes on c4, bishop takes on c4, and now bishop to b6 by Bobby, maybe adding to the tension between between these two pawns and getting on the same diagonal as the enemy king, although there are currently 4 pawns in the way. And now d takes on c5, and an intermezzo here. I did that a little fast, sorry. D takes on c5, and this opens up the opportunity of a queen trade, which Bobby accepts. Queen takes on d1, rook takes on d1, and now bishop takes on c5. And now this is a pretty strong bishop, the same diagonal as the enemy king, which is 2 pawns in the way. We have b4, pushing the bishop back. Bishop to e7, interesting move, not keeping it on this diagonal, and now bishop to b2 by Spassky, fianchettoing the dark squared bishop, and this is now a very nice piece, and maybe this was why Bobby wants the bishop on e7. He doesn't want Spassky threatening to capture the knight and force a capture back with the pawn, opening up this g-file. Now, if the bishop captures, then Bobby can just capture back with his bishop and keep his pawn structure intact. We have bishop to d7 by Bobby, rook a to c1, getting the rook on an open file. Ooh, and now rook f to d8, getting Bobby's rook on the open d file and challenging the rook here, the white rook on d1. Knight e to d4, knight takes on d4, knight takes on d4, and now bishop to a4, attacking this rook on d1. Spassky sees this, of course, and plays bishop to b3, blocking. The knight is protecting the bishop, so you can't just take it for free. But Bobby takes it not for free, but bishop takes, knight takes, and now rook takes, and now we have basically reached the endgame. Both sides have the exact same material. 6 pawns, a rook, a bishop, and a knight, and both of the kings are on the g-file on the 1st and 8th rank. So a very, very even position, which is the theme we'll talk about later on. We have rook to c8, getting the rook on the other open file, so now each side has one rook on one open file. King to f1 and king to f8, very symmetrical moves, which makes sense because the position is basically almost symmetrical. King to e2, and now knight to e4, improving the position of this knight, just getting deeper into the enemy position, and now rook to c1, offering up a rook trade. Bobby accepts, rook takes, bishop takes, and now f6 by Bobby, just moving the pawns down the board. Knight to a5, attacking the b7 pawn. Bobby sees this, and instead of playing b6, instead he plays knight to d6, protecting this pawn now on b7. We have king to d3, bishop to d8, getting the bishop out of the way of the knight, and now threatening to capture the knight maybe and mess up the pawn structure maybe. And knight to c4, not allowing this, and now bishop to c7 by Bobby. Knight takes on d6, bishop takes on d6, and now b5 by Spassky. And this is the critical position in the game. you know, this is a drawn position, right? Or the engine says it's drawn, the engine says it's even. Both sides have the exact same material. They have 6 pawns. They have a dark squared bishop, so bishops on the same square. Both sides obviously have a king, which is a given. And if you're playing here with the black pieces, often, especially in the modern game, you're very happy to go home with a draw. And the next day when you have the white pieces, try to take the advantage and because you have the first move, go for the win. But Bobby hated draws. Bobby did not like when a game, you know, reached a draw, which is kind of fun as a chess fan because it means he played really aggressive and had some really exciting games. But here he made a very aggressive move to try to get the advantage and break through, even though this is a drawn position. So see if you can guess what his move. I don't want you to be in the habit of guessing bad moves here, but see if you can guess what his move here is while I give you a couple of seconds. Okay, here Bobby plays, and this is, you know, goes down as one of the greatest mistakes, the greatest blunders of all time. He plays bishop takes on h2, getting rid of a pawn, but this allows Spassky, of course, to play the very sneaky. This is a really great technique if you haven't seen this in your games. If someone does this to you, takes on h2 or even a2, or of course h7 and a7, you just play g3, and now, oh my goodness, this bishop is trapped. You can't take on g3 because then pawn takes, and by the time the bishop gets to g1 to capture on f2, the king will be there on e2, defending this pawn. So now this bishop has nowhere to go, and Bobby essentially just said, I'm going to trade my bishop for a couple pawns and see if I can break through on the king side. If you plug this into an engine, the engine at first says bishop takes h2, which I'm a little bit surprised at, but I tried a bunch of different moves, and a6 looked like the best move that leads to a draw. Here, Spassky would just take, pawn takes, and now we have basically the same exact idea. You can't try to play b6 here because I don't think there's a way to prevent the bishop from taking on b6. Yeah, because the white bishop can't get to the defense of b6, neither can the king, so you just have to, you're forced to trade, and now this is even more of a draw than before. But Bobby went for it, so let's see what happens. He plays bishop takes on h2, pawn to g3, and now the explosive h5, trying to achieve a breakthrough on the king side, but now just king to e2, and now the bishop really is trapped. It can't get out without being captured by the king or the pawn. So h4, asking Spassky, do you want to take the pawn? And of course Spassky doesn't, because if Spassky takes the pawn, then the bishop is free. So Spassky ignores that and plays king to f3. And now, no matter what, now if you take, I think, well, we might see this line, but if you take on g3, then pawn takes, and this bishop is still trapped because the king is coming to g2. And so the bishop obviously can't take here because then king takes. And after Bobby makes some silly move here, king to g2, and now the bishop can't go anywhere without being captured by the king. We're going to see that line, so I don't know why I showed it, but now you'll be more prepared when you see it. So in any case, Bobby plays king to e7, improving the position of his king, and now finally king to g2, attacking the bishop. H takes on g3, protecting the bishop for a moment, but now pawn takes on g3, and now the bishop is just completely trapped. Can't capture or escape without being captured by the king. You want to use the bishop, of course, so here he takes on g3, king takes on g3, and when it's all said and done, Bobby is up 2 pawns for the price of a bishop, which in general is not a good trade, and here it's certainly not a good trade on an open board in this position, and now this is a slight advantage for Spassky, but as we'll see, a slight advantage avalanches into a massive advantage, and we'll just go from there. So king to d6 by Bobby, a4 by Spassky, king to d5, trying to sort of get to one of these pawn islands, or sorry, not pawn islands, trying to get to one of these pawn structures and win with the king. Bishop to a3, and now king to e4, attacking, of course, this pawn on e3, but now you just get bishop to c5, defending the pawn. And here, here Bobby plays a6. We have now b5 or b6, just locking up this pawn on b7, and Bobby plays f5, trying again just to break through somehow with all these pawns. Here Spassky plays g4, threatening to sort of walk the king in behind Bobby's position, and now f4 by Bobby. We have a trade. Pawn takes, king takes, and now king to h5, again threatening to sort of gobble up this pawn, and Bobby unfortunately just has no way to defend it. He has no bishop that can zoom around the board and defend the pawn from this diagonal. So king to f5, I guess he can technically defend it if he marches his king back, but then he's going to have other things to worry about. So king to f5, bishop to e3, king to e4 attacking the bishop. Of course, Spassky sees it, bishop to f2, and now king back to f5, and finally bishop to h4. This bishop is going after this pawn along with this king, and then together they're going to deal with this pawn on b7 and then promote the b6 pawn and win the game, is the idea. So Bobby plays e5, bishop to g5, now guarding the e3 square, which this pawn has to pass through, e4, and now bishop to e3, preventing the pawn from going any further. And Bobby's king cannot get to this bishop. These two squares are cut off by the bishop and the white king, so you'd have to go all the way around to deal with this bishop, and that's not going to work, of course. So king to f6, protecting the pawn on g7, but now king to g4 by Spassky. Now Spassky is going to try to get one of these pawns, and he has many options, and Bobby can't defend them all with his king. King to e5, king to g5, and now, again, unfortunately, this is sort of like an opposition situation where basically you can see it's sort of a nice, by putting the king on g5, you're creating a wall here that Bobby's king cannot move to, so he has to leave the defense of this pawn on g7. So now Bobby goes for it. He plays king to d5. Maybe he can gobble up these pawns and push these two pawns to promotion. But now even king to f5 by Spassky, really forcing Bobby's king away from this side of the board. All of these squares are taken away. a5 by Bobby, wants to keep his king strong on d5 and protect this passed pawn on e4. But now just bishop to f2, a waiting move by Spassky. He has the bishop that can move back and forth forever. Bobby does not have that luxury. None of these pieces really want to move. This is sort of a Zugzwang situation where the king, any squares it moves to, it is a Zugzwang. It's not kind of a Zugzwang situation. It is a Zugzwang. That means that it's your move, but you don't want to move because moving any of your pieces leads to a disadvantage. The black king here, any square that it goes to, it will abandon the defense of the e4 pawn, and Spassky will gobble it up. You can't move this pawn because then the bishop will gobble it up, and unfortunately you can't move this pawn because the king will gobble it up. So nothing works. Bobby goes for the least of the three evils and plays g5. We have king takes on g5. King to c4 by Bobby, trying to get this pawn, but now king to f5. King to b4, king takes on e4, and now king takes on a4, and maybe looks like Bobby can make this work. If he's just able to capture this pawn, he'll get a draw because you can't checkmate with just a bishop. But unfortunately, this pawn is being protected by the bishop on f2, and it's going to be tough to really make that happen. So king to d5, going for this pawn on b7, so Spassky can finally promote. King to b5 by Bobby, and now after king to d6, Bobby resigned the game because there's no way to prevent, well, you can't, the king can move to a6, but then after Spassky's king, for example, gets to c7, then this pawn is protected forever by the king, and this bishop can, let's just see like an example. The bishop can come to e1, and after the king retreats, bishop takes, and if the king takes, then Spassky's king takes on b7, and now there's no way to prevent this pawn from promoting. So obviously, as soon as that happened, Bobby saw that and resigned the game. Again, once the king is cemented on c7, you can capture this pawn with the bishop, and Spassky's king will capture this pawn and allow his pawn to promote, and the game is over. So crazy game. We often don't see these really drawn out end games. In this, it's a good example to never, you never want to resign. I'm just going to go back to the crucial move here if I can find it. You never want to resign because you never know when your opponent will make a mistake, even in a very boring end game. And here, I don't know if we can call it a mistake. I think just Bobby trying to be very aggressive and get a win out of a draw. So crazy game. Thanks for watching. If you want to see how the rest of the match went, I have some videos on that as well, which I'll link below. But in any case, drop a like, drop a subscribe. Let me know of other games you like. Let me know of any other games you'd like me to review, and we'll see you next time.